All right. So in last session, I think people who have joined, I know we have new joiners in this call, but in the last session we talked about our Azure AD, and we also talked about the way Azure AD is different from our on-prem Active Directory domain services. Today, in continuation to that talk, we'll talk about the identity and access management of Azure AD and how we can configure Azure AD Connect, which is a component from Microsoft, to synchronize our identity from on-prem domain controller into Azure AD. So I've kept this session for 1 hour, and my focus would be more on hands-on. So I will just quickly go through the topics that we will cover, and then after that we will move into hands-on demo, wherein I'm going to go ahead and configure an Azure AD Connect server on a domain controller which is running in Azure, and we will see things in actions. Uh, so I know most of you know me, but my name, I'll introduce myself. I'm Neeraj Kumar, and I'm working as a cloud architect with one of a firm in here in US, and I extensively work on Azure side. We'll move on to the next slide. So today's agenda is we'll cover Azure AD IAM, and especially on the authentication side. And in terms of Azure AD IAM, Identity and Access Management, so we will talk about the different authentication scenarios that you have. The cloud-only identities, wherein you have only identities in cloud and you don't have any connectivity back to on-prem. You have same sign-on where you're syncing your password to the cloud. You have single sign-on, wherein you are going back to on-prem for authentication. And now, in case you want to configure your authentication in a way that the authentication happens on-prem, that is something, we call it single sign-on. So in case of you want to configure single sign-on, you will have different options for configuring that. So some of the options which Microsoft provides you is Azure AD Connect Pass-Through. So that's a new feature which Microsoft has introduced as a part of Azure AD Connect, and it's still in public preview. The second option that Microsoft gives you is use ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services, and the way that you set up, it's a Microsoft product which you'll have to have running on-prem, and ADFS has multiple components. We will cover ADFS Federation maybe in future sessions, but today we will concentrate more on Azure AD Connect. The third option that you can set up your single sign-on is using third-party federation technologies using SiteMinder, which is or any other third-party, or Ping Federate is also one of that. You can use that. The fourth option is Azure Control Services, which Microsoft is going to deprecate it, and they're migrating this feature to Azure AD B2C, business to consumer version, wherein you can federate with uh, the public IAM providers like Google, Yahoo, Facebook. If you want to federate with that, you can make use of ACS. So that's also something which is there for you for consumption if you really want to set up a single sign-on. Then finally, we'll also talk about in general, the federation protocol that's being utilized. And the federation protocol that we use is called, there are two different protocols that is basically out there. One is WS Trust, Windows Services Trust, which is from Microsoft Protocol, and ADFS makes use of that. And then you have SAML2, which is basically used by all the third-party federation technologies. Guys, just give me a minute. Somebody's pinging me. I need to give him the link. Just hold on. Okay, so maybe he'll join. So, in
Neeraj,
term,
I have a question.
sure, go ahead.
So the same sign-on you're talking about, the Same sign-on as you are using on-prem.
So
This is
same,
what you mentioned for me.
yeah, so same sign-on is wherein we have two identities but same password. So your one set of identity exists on-prem, and then the same set of identity with same username exists in cloud. But it has the same password. So user gets the uh, they think that they are using same identity, but it's two different identities with the same password. So that's what is same sign. So same sign on is something wherein you sync your user ID and the password, and user will use the same password which they have on-prem. But technically, these are two different identities, one in cloud, one in on-prem. So that's same sign-on. Single sign-on, you have only one set of identity and one set of password, which is sitting on-prem. So any authentication which is going to happen, it will come back to on-prem for authentication. Whereas in case of same sign-on, the authentication will be handled in cloud in by Azure AD itself. It will not come to on-prem.
Okay, so the Azure AD will contain the password if you will sync it in the
Yes,
same sign-on.
yes,
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
Mhm. So moving on to the next slide, as I said, we'll talk about the Azure AD Connect. So Azure AD Connect is the driving technology behind the all the setups that we talked about. So Azure AD Connect, it lets you basically integrate your on-prem directory. So when I say on-prem directory, you have your Active Directory domain controllers, or which is running on 2008 or around 2003 VMs, or it could be 2012 or 2016 domain controllers as well. So basically, you will use AD Connect to integrate and sync the identities from on-prem into Azure. So Azure AD Connect is a piece of software that is free of cost, and you can download it from Microsoft website, which we'll see in our demo today. That we will download the Azure AD Connect and uh, do a installation. That's one piece that we'll go through that. Another thing is, why would you use Azure AD Connect? As I said, if you use single sign-on, in that case, the user has to remember only one identity. The user doesn't have one identity on-prem, another identity in cloud, or anywhere else. So that what happens is it simplifies the user login process, and also it helps the user to be more productive, because now they don't have to remember multiple passwords like in for multiple providers. They can use a single identity source, so that way they can save time, and they can do more of their task rather than remembering this password. uh, Azure Active Directory, when you install the Azure AD Connect tool, it has three components. These are three internal components. It's very transparent to user. You won't see these services, when you're installing it, because Microsoft does everything for you in the background. But to know what is the architecture of Azure AD Connect, probably it's good to know about different components. So Microsoft Azure AD Connect has three components. One underlying the component is a synchronization service. This is very important service, because this is the one which takes your user identity, or reads your polls your local Active Directory on a set frequency, reads the user ID and the group, and all the settings that you have set up, and then it goes back to Azure AD and synchronizes it. So this is the responsibility of synchronization service, which is sitting underneath the Azure AD Connect tool. The second component is, which is an optional component that gets installed if if you try to set up a federation with ADFS. In that case, the Microsoft Azure AD Connect will also have this component installed, which will handle the ADFS service, or ADFS authentication, which will back channel the authentication back to ADFS. The third component, which Microsoft has released recently, maybe as recent as 2 months back, wherein now you can monitor the Azure AD Connect health itself. So it's a monitoring component. If something happens to your Azure AD Connect, something goes bad, this is the service which monitors the health, and it can alert you on the health of the Azure AD Connect. Some of the configuration options. that is available. When you walk through the Azure AD Connect setup or installation setup, you will see the options that you have which are listed. So as I said, the first one is the password synchronization, which is equivalent to configuring same sign-on, wherein you will sync your user identities from on-prem to Azure AD along with the password hash. Now, when I talk about password synchronization, you're not gonna sync password in clean text, or you're not syncing the actual password. Rather than you're syncing the password hash. In fact, it is hash of hash, so it's hashed multiple times before it is synced in Azure AD. So if you want to have same sign-on experience and you want to set up password synchronization, wherein you would like your users to use the same password, then you can, when you're setting up your Azure AD Connect, you can configure your password synchronization as well. So in that case, the password will get synchronized.
So whenever we synchronize the password, I mean change the password on-prem, will it automatically synchronize with on-prem,
With
or
Azure
there will be
AD,
some delay?
now, yeah, it will sync immediately. It will sync. It will trigger the synchronization. So if you change the password on-prem, it will get synced. And also in the password synchronization, there is something called a password write back. If you enable that feature, in that case, if user changes the password in Azure AD, you know, that password can also be written back to on-prem if you enable that feature.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
The second configuration is pass-through authentication, which is still in public preview, which is like again a single sign-on experience, but it doesn't require you to set up whole lot of ADFS infrastructure for authentication. In this case, Azure AD Connect itself will have additional software installed, which is the pass-through software, and that will interact with Azure AD to take on the authentication request from end user. And this component will authenticate against your on-prem Active Directory and then pass on the SAML token to Azure AD, and that's how user will get authenticated. So essentially, you don't have to uh, set up an ADFS, and without ADFS, you can have single sign-on and authentication can happen, uh, you know, on-prem. And also, when you use ADFS, you'll have to set up web application proxy ADFS web server, which sits in DMZ, and you'll have to set up the DMZ infrastructure. But if you're not such a big organization, you don't have budget for setting up any that kind of infrastructure. Microsoft has released this pass-through authentication, wherein you don't require any DMZ because there is no inbound call from internet to this server. Rather than this server makes an outbound call to Azure AD authentication queue and retrieves the authentication request. So that way, you don't have to really open any firewall port for incoming traffic. So that we will see today. I will try to do this in the demo. The third option that you get in Azure AD Connect is federation with ADFS. So Active Directory Federation Services, which, as I said, maybe we'll cover in future sessions. And finally, the last option is you get that do not configure. Do not configure if you had any third-party federation service provider and you want to configure with that, you will select that option when you're installing your Azure AD Connect. Okay, so let's get into demo. Any question? So before we get into demo, maybe I would like you to walk you through the authentication sequence of Azure AD. What happens when a user logs in from different scenarios. So today we'll talk about the cloud-only identity authentication, where you have your end user and you don't have any visibility, you don't have anything back to on-prem. You're not going to do anything with on-prem. All your identities exist in Azure AD. And this one is where your identity exists. So what happens is if you walk through the sequence, so the first user tries to access a resource in Azure portal. So for example, you try to log on to portal.azure.com. So, your requests come to Azure subscription portal. It recognizes that, you need to authenticate. So this portal is going to send you back to Azure AD Authentication portal, or, where you log on to Microsoft website. You get redirected to Azure AD Authentication for, portal for login. Once you come to the portal, you type in your username and password, and your Azure AD looks up your user ID and password because it's only cloud only identity. You don't have any identity back to on-prem. So what will happen is your authentication will happen with Azure AD itself. There won't be any on-prem connectivity. So you're authenticated against Azure AD, and then Azure AD issues you an access token, or basically it's a SAML token which says that you are properly authenticated. That is issued to the user. When I say user, it's everything is happening in the user browser, which is Internet Explorer, right? Or Chrome browser, any session which is happening. Now, once the browser receives the token, that the browser is gonna go ahead and present it to the resource that you're trying to access. So it could be a VM, it could be a PassSQL, it could be a web app, anything and everything, or it's a simple act of logging on to Azure subscription website, right? So this
So
this
Neeraj,
is. Mhm. Go ahead.
I have a question. So when this all this transaction is going on, so what kind of protocol is it being?
It uses SAML.
Okay, it's similar.
Yeah, so SAML is the cloud protocol, you can say. So in the cloud, we use SAML for any kind of authentication. It's a simple assertion markup language, and they have different versions. So Azure AD supports SAML too.
Okay, thank you.
Then moving on to the same sign-on authentication sequence. It's moreover remains same, as in case of your cloud-only identity, but the only difference is now you have a component which is sitting on-prem, which is sitting on your corpnet, or inside your corporate network, which is called Azure AD Connect. Now, Azure AD Connect server, what it is doing is it is talking to your on-prem Active Directory, and reading the user identities from on-prem and then syncing it to Azure AD. But apart from that, everything else remains same. Your user still gets authenticated here against Azure AD. The authentication doesn't come back to on-prem. User thinks that he or she is using same user ID and same password, so that's why they get a feeling of it's that I have only single identity. It's very transparent to user, but essentially what they are doing is they are using same sign-on, which means they are using an identity which is sitting in Azure AD and which has the same password, uh, and they are getting authenticated against Azure AD. So this is the same sign-on authentication. Same way, user tries to access the resource, and it gets redirected to Azure AD authentication portal. Azure AD authenticates it. In this case, your user ID and password is being synced. So, the Azure AD has the user ID password. It authenticates the user ID, the user, and then issues a SAML token, and then users present that SAML token to access the Azure subscription, right? So this is moreover, same as cloud-only identity authentication sequence, except that now we have identities synced from on-prem into Azure using Azure AD Connect. Then this is something as I said, it's Azure AD pass-through authentication sequence, wherein we have Azure AD Connect, which is sitting on-prem, which is syncing the user ID, but also it also acting as a pass-through server. So what happens? There's a slight modification. Now what will happen is, so your user will try to access a resource in Azure, and the user will be redirected to Azure AD Authentication Portal. So user comes over to Azure AD Authentication Portal. It puts in its username and password. Now this is where, in case of cloud only identity or same sign-on, the authentication happens here. But now since we have pass-through, what will happen is Azure AD will say, hey, I'm configured for pass-through authentication, which means that I will have to get it authenticated using the Azure AD Connect pass-through server. Now the way it works is, as I said, Azure AD Connect server, Azure AD cannot reach back to Azure AD Connect server on-prem rather than its other way around, where in Azure AD Connect server, which has the pass-through component installed, it constantly pulls the Azure AD authentication queue. So essentially, as a part of Azure AD pass-through, Microsoft has built this capability wherein any authentication request which comes over here is sitting in a virtual authentication queue. Now, this Azure AD pass-through component constantly pulls that queue for any kind of authentication request. So, the moment it pulls, it says, hey, I have a user authentication pending. So, the pass-through server will take that request, that user ID and the password hash, and then once it has retrieved those details, it will go and authenticate the user. So this pass-through server will authenticate the user on behalf of the user. So basically now it will come, it will talk to the domain controller over here, present the username and password, and then the user gets authenticated. So the domain controller say, okay, I know this user and the password looks valid, so he's authenticated. This authentication, it comes back to Azure AD, and Azure AD pass-through servers recognizes that the user is a valid user and is properly authenticated. It creates a SAML token, or rather than authentication, and it posts it to Azure AD. So now Azure AD receives that authorization or access token, or rather than it says, instead of SAML token, it says that, hey, I see that this user is a valid user, go ahead and issue him or her a token. So after that authentication is over, this Azure AD from here will issue an access token to end user. So basically Azure AD is trusting the AAD Connect pass-through component for authentication request. So in this case, if you look at it, the authentication happens on-prem. Uh, so you don't have to maintain two identities or two passwords. The authentication is coming back to on-prem. This is another way to perform a single sign-on or configure single sign-on, wherein you use Azure AD Connect pass-through. It's good for organization from small to medium, which needs SSO, but for large organization, this may not be a feasible solution. And probably the large organization, they always either they'll have the federation set up or they will use ADFS for single sign-on. But you see the difference between the cloud-only identity and same sign-on was that authentication happened in those two scenarios against Azure AD, whereas in case of single sign-on, the authentication is happening across your on-prem Active Directory or on-prem ADDS.
So Neeraj, I have a question here.
Mhm.
So in this case, this AD Connect is working kind of as a ADFS,
Yes, kind of,
right?
but it's not the same, but yeah.
Right. So it's going to issue the SAML token. But if I have some of the resources in my Azure, which should be authenticated with my on-prem using Kerberos, which does not support any SAML applications. So in that case, how should I configure it?
So that's a different scenario altogether. So right now we are talking about cloud authentication. So that's where you will extend your on-prem infrastructure, or you will set up a domain controller over here in Azure, and then you will make use of that, or you will open your firewall ports from your service running in Azure to talk to your domain controls on-prem. So that will make Kerberos possible. But
Will that also cover future sessions?
uh, not in this session, but maybe in future we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. So let's get into the demo piece. I'll say, okay. All right. So what I'll do is I have this my domain controller, which I have installed on Azure. And what we're going to do is we will see the Azure AD Connect installation. So let me connect to that server. So what you see is, I have this domain controller which is sitting in Azure, and I have installed my domain controller on it. It's a Windows 2016 server, and I will log in. So after I log in, I should be able to install the Azure AD Connect on it.
So you are considering this as a on-prem domain controller?
Yes, you can think of it as a like domain controller. I mean, essentially, you won't install Azure AD Connect on a domain controller per se. You will install it on a separate, Azure AD server. So it will be on a member server. But in my case, it's just a demo, so I'm installing this Azure AD Connect software on the same as on the domain controller. Which is not a good practice,
Okay.
but as for demo is concerned, I mean, I'm just doing it. But in your production, what you'll do is you will have it set up on a separate member server, which has outbound internet connectivity. You will need internet connectivity, right?
Right.
So
So this WoW Azure, well, we should consider as a kind of just for lab. This is on-prem domain controller.
yeah, this is your on-prem domain controller, and just consider that I'm installing this Azure AD Connect not on the domain controller, but I'm installing this on a member server.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you can download the Azure AD Connect from Microsoft website, and it's a free downloadable tool which is available, which you can download it. You don't need to pay anything. It's free of cost, of course. So, when you install it, what it's gonna do is you will, when you double click, once you have downloaded it and you double click it, this is what the interfaces look like. So I will just quickly uh, walk you through the URL, but it's a URL. I can paste that on the chat, and you can download your Azure AD Connect from there. But once you have downloaded it, you will come back to over, and when you start your Azure AD Connect, uh, the package, when you try to install it, this is what the first screen is you're gonna get it. So there are two settings which you see over here. Okay. So I mean, there are two settings. There are two ways you can configure your Azure AD Connect. One is express setting. So if you select, if you see over here on the bottom, you have use express setting. What it will do is if you select that, it will configure your synchronization of identity from your whichever forest you have. So in my case is wow azure.local. It will also configure password synchronization from on-prem to Azure AD. So essentially it's setting up your password synchronization for same sign-on. It will also start your initial synchronization, wherein it will sync up all the users and it will sync all the attributes. So this is something which is good for people who are doing it first time. So you can select express setting, but in our case we will select customize so that we get more advanced option. When you select customize, these are the options that you get, right? If you look at it, you will see you have password synchronization. So, this is same as a same sign-on. So if you want to synchronize your password, you will select the password synchronization pass-through that I talked about, that wherein you can configure your authentication to come back to on-prem, and it uses Azure AD Connect pass-through component, which is still in preview. That's what I told you. Uh, the federation with ADFS, if you really want to do that, you can. We'll cover that ADFS federation in future sessions. And finally, do not configure, which is an option if you are connecting using a third-party federation provider, which is not in ADFS. Uh, this is something we'll not discuss about it. This is single sign-on. This is for Windows 10 machines, so probably we'll skip this. So, but currently, we will go ahead and configure the password synchronization. So I say next. Now here, if you look at it, this widget, depending on what option you choose, these settings over on the left would change. Now it says connect to Azure AD. So here you'll have to specify the global admin credential of your Azure AD. So the user which has global admin credential. Now, if you specify normal users who doesn't have a global admin credential or rights, it will fail. So I'm gonna put in my global admin credentials, right? And it is cloud dot on microsoft.com, and then I'll put in the password. So this will validate, it will go and validate against my Azure AD tenant. This is your Azure AD tenant name. You remember this was what we created in last session. So this is where I'm using, and this is my user ID, which has global admin permissions. So I say next. So what it is doing is connecting to Microsoft Online and to verify my credentials. So once it verifies the credential, it will let me move forward. So let's wait for to verify. It may take a few seconds. So if I have put in right credential, it should, you see in the brief it says verifying your global admin. So it did verify that I have global admin permission. So now what it is doing is it is examining the local domain, which domain I have available on-prem, which in this case, which is Active Directory domain controller. So it should discover wow azure.local. That's my domain. So let's see. Yep, here you go. So now, once it has verified my Azure AD credential, uh, it has also made a discovery that, this member server probably or a domain controller is configured in this forest. And if you had multiple forests, it will list you those. But in my case, I have only one, which is wow azure.local. So here, remember when we were connecting to Azure AD server, we gave global admin password of Azure AD. Here you'll have to give an enterprise admin credentials. So in this case, it will be that's my domain name and this is my user. So this will be, hopefully I remember the password. So I put in my enterprise admin credential and I have put in my password and I say add directory. So it has validated the username and the password, and it has added my wow azure.local active directory, right? Now I say next. So it's doing the configuration in the background. Once it is done with the configuration, probably it will move to the next wizard, which is we have to configure the Azure AD sign in. So let's give a couple of minutes. The difference between Azure AD and Active Directory Domain Controller. What's the difference between these two?
Azure AD and on-prem AD,
Yeah.
it's entirely different. So you got your Active Directory in uh, The one that you have in on-premise is your on-premise Active Directory, and the one that you synchronize in Azure is your Azure Active Directory.
Okay. Any basic difference you would like to point out between these two directories?
Difference
Oh,
is protocol.
you mean the architecture wise?
Yeah, anything that which is different. In Azure AD, you cannot do it, but you can do it in on-prem Active Directory.
So in the Azure Active Directory, it's a simple hierarchy, we believe, and in the on-prem, it's domain OU hierarchy we can use.
Mhm.
And I think in the protocol as well, in the on-prem, we're using Kerberos.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good point. So on-prem Active Directory
There it
supports
is.
Kerberos, whereas Azure AD supports SAML. Another thing is you cannot join your virtual machines to Azure AD or your computers to Azure AD, but on-prem you can join it. And Azure AD is a lightweight directory, and you can say it's Atom in cloud. So if you have worked with Atom in older world, so you will know it. So Azure AD is essentially it's a lightweight directory or Atom in cloud. In Atom, you couldn't join your VM, so same kind of uh, the limitations exist today with Azure AD. But that's changing. Azure AD is also evolving. Now you can join devices to Azure AD. That's a different topic altogether. That's for Azure AD B2C.
Security policies in Azure AD.
No, you cannot apply group policies. You have on-prem group policies. You cannot apply group policies in Azure AD. You cannot have OU, organizational unit. You cannot join your VM to Azure AD. It only supports SAML, and a lot of other limitations. You cannot set up a replication. So in case of on-prem, you could set up your replication, but in case of Azure AD, you cannot set up any replication as such. You can set up a synchronization, but I mean, there are a lot of limitations which you cannot do it, and that's why Microsoft has also come up with something called managed ADDS. It's called Azure ADDS, wherein Microsoft will run domain controller. It's a PaaS offering for you. Microsoft will run domain controller for you, and can integrate with your Azure AD to provide you Kerberos authentication. So one of the questions that you had is that if you have an application which wants to make use of Kerberos, in that case, you can make use of Azure ADDS, which is a PaaS offering, or you can also extend your on-prem Active Directory to Azure.
So has that been recently released, or it's in preview, or it has been
I think
released
Azure
officially?
ADDS is still in preview, but I'll have to look at the latest. But last time when I knew it was in preview.
Okay, it's kind of the same AWS AD, and now they are releasing it
Uh,
for Azure.
I I don't think so. It's same as Azure AD, but it's something what Microsoft in the background they will provision domain controller for you, two domain controller, which is in highly available availability set, and then you sync that with your Azure AD.
No, I'm comparing to AWS AD, not with the Azure AD.
Uh, yeah, I mean, so maybe the 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 thing is probably you want to use Azure AD. Yeah, Azure AD is you're talking about the AWS IAM, right?
No, no. So the ADDS from Azure you're talking about. So I was comparing with the AWS Active Directory services.
Oh
Like
yeah,
they are.
so to be honest, I haven't really focused on AWS side of, but it may be
Okay.
same. It may be same. I
Yeah.
can't really.
Okay.
But anyway, so now what you see is here, what it is saying is that now you can synchronize the user, but the UPN that's being used, this UPN is not added to the our on-prem Active Directory. So what will happen is in this case is UPN suffix will uh, you'll have to go and change your UPN suffix so that it matches to your Active Directory, uh, which is in Azure AD, right? You can do that, otherwise your user won't be able to log in. So, Uh, I don't know how many of you know about UPN suffix. It's user principal name suffix. Your user can use multiple suffixes for login, and that's something if you really want to do it, you can do that. Otherwise, we are, you know, uh, we are fine with that. So maybe just for this demo, what I'll do is I will just skip that step. I'll say next. Now this is where you will specify your domain or OU filtering. Like, do you want to specify the sync all the domains in OU, or you want to just select the sync the selected one? So, it's a good practice that you only sync the selected one. So it will expand, it will show me the OUs. It's still loading the data. And instead of syncing each and every object, what you will do is, if you look at it, so it's going by default, it will sync everything for you. I don't want everything to be synced. Please don't sync it, right? I will say I want to sync only my cloud app OU, so I will remove the built-in, I'll remove the domain controls, I'll remove the infrastructure, keys, lost and found, entity as programs, systems, users, configuration. So all my users are in cloud app. I can show you. So this is my OU. So I have a cloud app OU. That's where I have end users, which you can see over here. Uh, and then I also have a user group. So let's. So I have created some, 5 users here. If you look at it, so I have, myself and also the other users, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I also have a group. So essentially, I don't want to sync everything. I just want to sync only the cloud app OU where I have my end user identities and the groups. So let's do this. What I'll do is I will go ahead and disable one of the user account so that when we sync up, we can see that that user is disabled. Let's see. I say disable account. So wow, Azure one user is disabled. So let's come back to the our Azure AD Connect. So I'll say that I want to sync only the cloud app. I said next. And here you have to specify, any object that you sync from on-prem. You have to specify its immutable ID. It's something called, the uh, which is like, it uniquely identifies your user object, because remember, you can sync multiple identities from multiple forests into single Azure AD. So you will need a way to uniquely identify that. In this case, there it's selecting object GUID. Object GUID is an attribute of any Active Directory object that we create on-prem. So in that case, what will happen is, in that case, you make sure that, or otherwise, if you really want to, you can also have your own immutable ID. So what is source anchor? This is something called which is immutable ID. So you can also specify if you really want to have a different source anchor. You have option, or you can also specify custom source anchor, which is immutable ID. But in this case, I'll say just leave it to object GUID, which is very common, and it's very difficult to have duplicate object GUID. But this is where you have to make sure that whichever attribute you use, that attribute is stamped uniquely across user objects in your forest or any forest in future you will sync to Azure AD. So you have to plan it carefully. So I say next. Then here you can set up filtering. Now what happens is I said that okay, go ahead and use the cloud app forest, but if you want to just synchronize only the selected one for users and device, and you can specify a group. You say that okay, I just want to only synchronize users of a particular group. Then in that case you will just say synchronize selected. So basically what will happen is, again, it's in pilot, but what will happen is it's only going to sync the user in the group, or a user in that group, right? So we will just leave it, so that it synchronizes all users and devices for me, and I don't want to set up any filtering. So I'll say next. Now this is where you can select all the other options, right? So this is what I talked about the which you asked about the password write back. So if you select the password write back, if user changes the password in Azure AD, it will go back and sync to on-prem. You can also do a group write back, but this is because we don't have, this is still in preview, and I think this is a feature of Azure Premium. Azure AD Premium. I don't have Azure AD Premium, so that's why these two features are disabled by default. You can also set up, if you want to set up any kind of advanced filtering, you can set up using Azure AD App Attribute Filtering. That's where you can set up your advanced filtering. Apart from that, if you want to sync additional attributes, because by default it will pick up only the standard attribute from your Active Directory, but if you want to include additional attributes, in that case you can select this option and configure that. You can always reconfigure these settings once you have done it by selecting the custom. You can run this setup once again, and you can modify all these attributes. This is not something that it's only done one time. You can always modify it. I'll say next, and I say install. And don't crash on me this time, please. It's configuring the Microsoft Azure Active Directory sync, configuring Cloud EC on Microsoft.com. That's my Azure AD tenant.
So this Azure AD tenant is cloudez.onprem on Microsoft.com, but you also created one custom domain with cloudez.com.
Yeah, this name doesn't, you need not confuse. I just created my Azure AD tenant with the same name. I shouldn't have done that. It causes confusion for you, but this is initial domain name of my Azure AD. Remember, right?
So what, is the,
It- so initial name is Cloud
so
E.
what was the benefit of,
Uh-huh. Pardon?
so what was the benefit of creating a custom domain cloudez.com?
So you remember it asked for my UPN. I can add my UPN cloudeasy.com into Azure into Active Directory, and user can use that ID to log in. So that can be UPN for the user. So let us finish. I will just open the Active Directory uh, domain and trust, where there you can configure your UPN. So you can configure that UPN, and user can use at .com ID to log in. While it is running, so let it run. What I'll do is I will open domain domain.msc. It is slow. All right, let it go on.
Yeah.
And this will have challenge. So you can look at here, right? So our sync status is enabled. Remember, when we had initially, it was not configured for sync. So now once we have configured the sync, so it has configured the sync status is set to enable. Last sync, it is still trying to uh, run. So sync server has not run, but in the meanwhile it's doing it. Federation, we have not set up a federation. Once we set up federation using ADFS, you will see those domains over here. This is your health and analytics, Azure AD Connect Health. Remember, I talked about that Azure AD Connect has three components. The sync servers, then you have ADFS component, which is for ADFS, and then Azure AD Connect Health. You can come over here and you can look at it. So it has set the sync status to enable, so which means it is syncing. let's come back. Let's see. Updating synchronization rules. It's going to take some time. Let's see if it has synced any users. If I come over here and I see all users. Yep. So not yet. I haven't received any users, but you have on-prem directory synchronization. This is a service account. So it creates two service account, one service account for on-prem and one service account for Azure AD. So you remember we have provided global admin credentials for Azure AD and enterprise admin credentials. That's only needed one time, and system is not Azure AD Connect is not going to make use of that to configure any of its services. Rather, it uses that account to create these service accounts, which you see over here. It should populate another one. This is for on-prem. There should be another one for uh, Azure AD one. So let's see.
So these service accounts will be created in Azure AD only, right?
Yeah, the Azure AD side. And yeah, you will also have one service account which gets created on the on-prem domain as well. But once that service account is what will be used for uh, synchronization. It will not make use of your enterprise admin credentials.
So are you saying one account will be created in Azure AD and one account will be created in my on-prem and domain controller?
Yes, that will also be done because that's the account that it will use to connect to your domain controller to retrieve the users and attributes and other. So it has two permissions. I don't remember those two permissions which are granted. One is replicate changes and read schema, the two options. Sorry, I don't recall the exact permission, but maybe
So
while we're waiting for it, so it's updating the part. I can let me, hopefully now I should have it. So come on, can I see my new users? Not yet. So let's look at the Azure AD Connect. So Azure AD Connect sync has never run, so it is still waiting. So let it go on. So this is installing the Azure AD Connect Health Agent, which monitors the health of Azure AD. Hopefully it should finish soon. So while it is configuring, so in a nutshell, what we did, right? So we talked about Azure AD, we talked about Azure AD Connect, we talked about how to set up Azure AD Connect synchronization and what are the supported method for it, right? So if we come back to so we talked about the cloud-only identity. We talked about same sign-on. We also talked about single sign-on, and probably this is where we were doing today the same sign-on wherein we're syncing the password. But in next session we will cover the single sign-on using Azure AD Connect through and the ADFS hopefully. And third-party federation technology, probably I won't be able to give a demonstration because I don't have any access to any of the softwares. But I can certainly cover the ACS, which is Azure Control Service. Again, if you want to have federation with the social identity providers like Facebook, Google, Yahoo, Windows Live ID, Microsoft provides you that. So we will, you know, probably look at the demo in the next session. And yeah, that's it. So let's see what's the status of the sync. So here you go. So it says your configuration is complete. Azure AD succeeded. It's gonna process initiated. It's complete. The Active Directory cycle pin is not enabled. That's fine. To sync Windows 10 domain joined computer. So this is what I was talking about, right? So people have asked that you have 10 computers or a small company, so you can join your Windows 10 and you can have it go as a registered device in Azure AD. This failed. That's fine. I don't need the health one. It's okay. So let's hopefully we will see the users here if synchronization is completed. I still say that sync has not completed. So once sync completes, you will be able to see all your users under your users. You will see all the users that we have on-prem. We'll see it over here. So maybe next session we will be able to see all those users. So thank you all of us, all of you who have joined and stayed late. It's 30 minutes over the allotted time. Hopefully, next sessions will cover more on Azure AD and Azure ADFS and Federation.
Hey, thank you, Neeraj.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Neeraj. Thank
Bye.
you for us. I'll see.
Good
All
night.
right.
Bye. Good night.